of the steak. Like just trim it. All right, you guys, let's get going. All right, thank y'all for being here this morning. I know it's early, but sometimes it pays off, like when it's fall has games and like Parkins left, so I get in here early, right? Get here, get a spot, get it done with. Shut up, Campbell. Start teaching. I want to remind before we get into today's lecture, we are going to talk about homework. I want to set things up. I like to set things up to try to walk a path to make it make sense. Not for some of you already kind of get it, but you can get it even better to continue. The more you do it, the better you get at. And some of you are quite not there yet, and that's okay. Because once the light bulb goes off, you're going to be like, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Okay? So what I want to remind us of a previous lecture is that in the real world, we typically talk about rotations in motion from smaller things moving about bigger things, because that's most of the time how things will move. So when you're playing a board game and it says, you roll the dice and it says go forward 3 spaces, it's from the small piece moving about the big piece, not hey board, go back 3 spaces. Okay? That would never happen, right? You would never move the board about the person, but moving the person forward or the board back would get you to the same place. Yes? Okay. The next example is, imagine reading a book, small piece moving about big piece. Can you imagine if we read big piece moving about the small piece? It would be ridiculous, and it would look like this. All right? Very unrealistic. Small door moves about big wall. We get accustomed. When you open your water, probably you're going to rotate the cap about the bottom. But when it comes to human motion, those rules do not apply. It applies a lot of times, but they don't have to apply all the time. So our brains aren't used to seeing things differently. And not only that, you have only been introduced to movement from the small piece moving about the big piece. And so your brains are locked in on it looks like it's moving and it is. Or it looks like it's not moving and it's not. Okay? So yesterday I was meeting with a student to go over the test. And I get better the more I do this. I get better at analogies. And I came up with this really cool, different way to look at what I'm talking about, and I'm going to use it to describe the hip rotation. Okay? So sometimes using the little head here is the only thing on the Kindle that transversely rotates. The shoulders can only go sagittal, hips can only go sagittal. And sometimes it's tough because this is the small piece moving about the bigger piece. So what I did yesterday is I flipped them upside down. And I said, okay, imagine if Ken, look to your right. It's his right shoulder, right? So Ken looking to his right would be this. His right. Good so far? Okay. So in other words, external rotation, you've been introduced because the small piece moving about the big piece. Okay. It's going to look like this. Ken went from looking forward to looking to his right shoulder. His right shoulder. Now, if we were going to move the big piece about the small piece, it wouldn't rotate the same globally. It would rotate like this for him to look at his right shoulder. In essence, movement relative to 2 segments is I either bring my eyes to see my right shoulder, or I bring my right shoulder to see my eyes. Same motion, same thing, same relative motion, okay? So watch what I did here that I think will work. Small piece, big piece, okay? I know this doesn't represent a socket, but it represents the concept of a small piece moving about a big piece, okay? Left hip, external rotation is the same as left hip, external rotation. Got to the same place. left hip, external rotation. Ken's looking at his right shoulder. Left hip, external rotation. Ken's looking at his right shoulder. Good? You see how that's the same thing? Do you also see how tempting it would be to want to say, well, if this is external and the head spun like this, anything I see spinning like this, I want to give the same credit to. But in this case, it would not be. Watch what would happen if I spun like this. Head stays fixed, body moves like this, comme ça. Ken is looking at his left shoulder. You see how that's different? From here to there, looking at this shoulder, is not the same as from here to there, looking at the different shoulder. You get it? You get it? Good. Let me get into and if this wasn't, when I had the Rona, if this wasn't taught to you, it's okay. That's why we have time. We have time. External, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal. Did y'all hear or learn or watch my old videos about the illusion of this one? The reason it is an illusion is because we are so used to wanting to look at fixed spaces. Hands go forward, palms go up. So we're looking at the feet, but the feet have nothing to do with my hip. The hip is about how does the ball move about the socket. Anything else is a distraction, okay? So the analogy I like to use is for this PVC pipe. If I rotate the pipe, isn't every piece on this pipe spinning in the same direction? True? However, linearly, remember there's a difference between straight line motion and rotational motion. Everything is rotating the same, but linearly, this top part is going to start to go to your left, while this bottom part is going to your right. That's okay. That's called a force coupling. This part's going up. This part's going down. But you see how it's still spinning the same? So this illusion happens with the knees and the elbows, because the elbow flexes anteriorly and the knee flexes posteriorly. So basically what you have is me showing my old age, can't do a stork stand for 10 seconds. But notice how the rotation is the same. But yet, my hand comes in, but my feet go out. With the same rotation. So what happens is students are so used to wanting to say, when the hands go in, it's this. When the hands go out, it's that. When the feet does this, it's this. When the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So when you sit down and you cross your legs like this, your instinct is to say internal, because you're seeing like the foot come into the midline. Internal, my foot came into the midline. So, hypnosis has nothing to do with my foot. The reason when my hip is flexed that my foot comes to the midline is because I'm externally rotating my hip. See? External rotation. Internal rotation. Good? Now let's get to your homework. Now that we established what it looks like it's moving, and it is, because even though it may be an illusion, guys, this is just as basic as this. External, internal. So what would happen if I move the socket? Let's try this analogy. I don't know if this is going to work, but we'll try. Ken's looking straight ahead. External, he's looking at his right shoulder for this analogy. internal, he's going here. So the socket here would be like this. True? Because think about it. If the socket, here's the socket, here's the ball on my left hip. My hip is flexed. This is internal and external rotation, right? Because rotation is owned by the long bone, as I told you all in the video lectures. So that means frontal plane rotation of the pelvis is actually going to line up with internal and external rotation of the hip when my hip is flexed. When my hip is in anatomical, frontal plane rotation of the socket is going to be ab and adduction. But when my hip is flexed, if this is internal and external rotation of the hip, if this is internal and external rotation of the ball, then this must be internal and external rotation of the socket. Does that make any sense whatsoever? So that being said, when I'm on my knee and my hip is flexed, Bourgeois freezing, and I don't know why, I'm always cold. Let's see if I could earn my pennies today. If we agree that this is external rotation, then we have to agree from my left hip's perspective, okay? If this is external rotation, then we have to agree that this, taking my socket and doing this with it, or right lateral pelvic girdle rotation, we have to agree that from my left hip's perspective, this is also external rotation. Now, I'm moving everything else with it to make it obvious, okay? Start, finish. Hey, hip, how would you have to rotate to go home? I'd have to internally rotate to go home. Great. Start, finish. Hey, hip, how would you have to rotate to go home? I'd have to internally rotate to go back home. Therefore, I had to externally rotate when I left. Whether that's moving the ball or the socket. Yes? So in this illusion, just because I introduced you guys to pelvic girdle rotations when we were in anatomical, doesn't mean that the pelvic girdle rotations will always line up with specific joint motions. Most of the time they probably will. But they don't have to if our hip is outside of anatomical. Okay. Did you guys from the video lectures or when I was away get introduced to horizontal ab and adduction? Awesome. It's just a variation of regular ab and ad. Meaning, here's the clock, regular ab, regular ad. What if I laid the clock on the table? You'd still have the same concept, away from 6 towards 6. I took the clock and I laid it down. The clock hand's still facing 6. When I flex my shoulder, I'm still at 6. So I can still deviate away or back towards. Does that make sense? We can't call it the same thing because there's going to be different muscles that pull in this direction versus this direction. In addition, we can't call it the same thing because even though Interstate 20, anybody from North Louisiana? Interstate 20 runs east and west. So does I-10, but they're not the same road, right? And to get to east and west on 20, you got to travel on a different road to be able to get up and move a similar way. So it's very similar. If I'm on I-10 here, in order to get on that interstate, I got to go up. I got to either ab, now I can do the horizontal ab or ad, or I have to flex. Now I can do the horizontal ab or ad. Make sense? So in other words, I can't horizontally add or add in anatomical position. I can't travel east and west on I-20 without first going north. Make sense? So think of it like this. If I want to make a square around the state, metaphorically, I'm away from 6 o'clock. Horizontal, add extension. Already got back to 6 o'clock. Extension just brings my clock back north. Flexion, horizontal, add normal, add clock can't get that. Cool. All right. So homework time. We started here, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, my memory is bad sometimes. I did right lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Is that correct? Started here. Here's my pelvis. Now remember, when I say pelvis, that means the sockets. The sockets are part of the pelvis. So here lie my sockets. This hip, more anatomical. This hip, flexed. So when I do right lateral, I'm moving both sockets. This one is going to abduct my right hip. And this one is going to externally rotate my left hip. And how do I know? Because if I kept my pelvis in the same position, the pelvis is never lost, I'd have to internally rotate my hip to go back to where it started relative to the pelvis. I mean, I had to externally rotate it when I left. It's just I didn't move the ball, I moved the side. Any questions about homework? And you're going to get something for your homework, because I'm going to ask this question on the test. Sure shoot. Any questions before I move on to the next one? The next hard one. Hard one. All right. Do you guys like, or it makes you uncomfortable when I ask y'all to move around? Good thing? Okay. Well, why don't I do this? You have the option. If you want to try this, because I personally feel if you move around, not only I think you'll be more comfortable in the test to move around, but maybe you'll be able to feel or see what I'm asking you to do, because this is a difficult one, okay? Here's your question. So in other words, I'm going to ask the question, make sure we're all on the same page, and I'm going to give you the creative freedom to do it if you wish, okay? Okay. Start. Notice I'm in a position where I could go down 49, but I could travel down Interstate 20, right? Okay. Here, I'm in Lafayette. Here, I'm in Shreveport. Start. Finish. I'm doing like a stretch. I'm going to tell you that I underwent right transverse pelvic girdle rotation. You should have picked that out, just in case. But what I want you to do is tell me, the basketball's spinning, I need you to tell me how did it spin? What specific hip motions spun that basketball? Start, my left hip is flexed, right hip anatomical. Finish. My left foot stayed on the ground, and my right knee stayed on the ground. So in other words, the smaller pieces stayed fixed, and I moved the socket about. Please feel free to get up and try. You're on your right knee, okay? Right knee, right transverse. You are now free to move about it. And always feel free to work in groups. Always feel free to ask your neighbor, hey, what do you think? Try it for the, let's see, yoink. Start, finish. Start, finish. Start, finish. Start, finish. If anybody's looking to get you something for Teacher Appreciation Week, some new hats. I told you how basketball's spin. I need you to tell me what's fun. What's fun? Yeah. Just like we did with this is all different kind of question. Floor. So in other words, hit a motion. All right, we're good? Okay. We analyze motion joint by joint. So what we can't say is two random hip motions, because I need you to know which one did what. The right hip did, the left hip did, okay? The right hip had right hip internal rotations when I did the right transverse pelvic rotation. Is there any questions about why the right hip had internal? You know why it might have looked different? Because you didn't have your toes to look at, but it was the same thing. Joint. Joint. Just didn't have my feet to look at, but it was the same motion of the hip. Is the same as cool. Okay. Left hip had horizontal abduction. Y'all know who David Pumpkins is? Saturday Night Live? SNL skit with Tom Hanks. Any questions? Left hip horizontal abduction. Any questions? Why? Good? Think of it like this. If you were going to stretch your horizontal adductors, it's going to be a final thing. This is common sense. It's just putting verbiage to stuff you already know. If I want to stretch my hamstrings, which are hip extension pullers, don't I want to flex my hips? As I flex my hips, I feel the stretch in the back. As I horizontally abduct, I feel the stretch in the front. Why? Because those are also pulling in the opposite direction. As I extend my wrist, I feel the stretch in the front. Why? Because those muscles are pulling in the opposite direction. So if I wanted to stretch the horizontal adduction pullers, like my inner thigh, wouldn't I want to horizontally abduct to feel that stretch? So it's the same concept. When you're here, your family nonstop. What's that commercial for some restaurant? When you do this, you feel that stretch on the inside of your thigh. Because from A to B is the exact same motion as from A to B. I'm just not elegant in what I do. Here to there is the same as from here to there. Is there some ankle and some knee stuff happening? Absolutely. It has nothing to do with my hip. We could have an ankle conversation. We could have a knee conversation. But this is a hip conversation. So all that extra stuff is just distraction. All I asked was, what did the hip do? Make sense? Any follow-up questions? Do y'all like the challenging ones? Would you like another one? Yay! Why are you just saying that?
This is like a Pilates class for me, man. You say, catch my breath. Ooh.
This class is brought to you by ICE and Advil. How about you? All right, go. Let's start easy. Let's warm up easy. What was the pelvic girdle rotation? Anterior, good. Anterior spin, anterior tilt, anterior pour, however you look at it. Because of what? Right hip flexion, good. Do you see how my left hip had nothing to do with it? My left hip could do back in my day, it was like the sanctuary or something. But my left hip could go all crazy, and it's not going to make my pelvis move until this hip makes it. Okay? All right. Start here. I am not going to give you the pelvic girdle rotation. We're progressing. So I just want you to open-ended tell me what you observed and from what perspective. I'm just trying to psych myself up and try to figure this out. Start. Finish. Start. Finish. Start position. Finish position. Tell me what mostly happened outside of tremors. I'm trying to hold that. Open-ended, you can do it. Get up, feel free. I was on my right leg. I was in a flex position. And then I did this. Tell me what you observed.
Discuss amongst your friends, discuss amongst yourself.
Even if they're not your friend, if they help you study, just pretend until finals. And then delete. About life. That's game on. That's good science right there. No fluff, no project that you're gonna end up saying, I did most of the work. And no artificial intelligence papers, just hardcore science. That's it. There's opportunities. I always like to, what I'm trying to do is protect. Let's say you make 4 A's, and someone else makes 2 C's, a B, and an A. You want that person to have extra opportunities to make the same grade you did. I mean, just like that, right? So what I will tell people though is that I have to create a free home. You know, someone may fail the first test, but then make B's on the next 3. I might look at that first test and say, hey, Alex, I was preceding. You showed me that you learned on that level. So it's all about. It's trying to teach you stuff. Honestly, it's trying to get money for it. Yeah. Stuff that you can have and apply for the rest of your life. Versus most classes that are just like, I'm glad that's over. I don't even know what it is. But that's why I do it.
Knowledge is power.
People are showing off. They're like doing it. They're like, oh no, violent shaking. It's the coffee, man. It's the coffee. I went to visit. Anybody travel on 167, like Maurice had? So a guy that I graduated high school with, real good friend of mine, started a factory business. And so, of course, I had to go support his business. I mean, not that I did such thing. But, was that,
One from the storage, more storage?
I can neither confirm nor deny that that is the case. So, I was trying to support his business, so I was like, give me a large one. Bro, that thing was like, I felt like I needed it, like a strap, like to carry it. I felt like a firefighter carrying a tank on my back. Oh, good Lord, man. That thing was a lot cheaper than the therapy session. All right, we're good? Are we still thinking? You're good, or y'all still thinking? That's okay, still think. That's how you learn. All right, you guys, the answer was, well, not the answer. How did the pelvis rotate? Left transverse. But you know what's great about that? First of all, I appreciate you saying it. On the test, you're going to get it right, and it today won't even matter, right? It doesn't cost you anything right now. Left transverse. Let's look at why, because there's other people that said right as well. You're not alone. Here, remember, the pelvis is never lost, right? Pelvis is always in its anatomical position because it's just a block. It's a basketball. The basketball can never be out of its anatomical position, it's just a ball. The pelvis is now looking at the ground. When I did this, the pelvis spun to its left. Hey, pelvis, spin to your left. Does that make sense? Left transverse, pelvic girdle rotation. Any questions about who, what, when, where, why, or how? Or how did I get here? This isn't where I park my car. We're good? Left transverse? Okay. What was the hip motion? Right hip. Which version of abduction? Horizontal. Good. Horizontal. And this is why. Remember, now we're not in Lafayette anymore. We're in Shreveport. So we're 6 o'clock. Now we're not at 6 o'clock. I need help. Here to there is the same as here to there. Exactly. Random phone noises. Right hip horizontal ab that looks like this is the exact same as right hip horizontal ab that looks like that. It's just I happen to be here when I did it. Feel the stretch. And that's such a great point. They sound so close. And especially when you got a delta maximum, man. They're practically the same thing. And that's why I try to do silly things like or AP. Abduction. It's so tough. Abduction. So coming back down would be right transverse. So I started here, right transverse. I even feel that on the outside because of horizontal right hip adduction. And goodness gracious, what I feel it right here. Because horizontal adduction would be where I feel the stretch of the muscles that pull the other one. Make sense? Did my left hip have significant motion? It might look like it did, but it went along for the ride. So in other words, I didn't do this. I moved both the ball and the socket in the same way, and my left hip stayed in anatomical position. You see that? Cool. But you see how it can be tempting, right? Oh, that left hip externally rotated. One more. All right, we'll get one more. That's an Ocean's 11 joke. Do you guys even watch movies anymore? No, just TikTok. That'd be cool if like you did a whole movie on one like TikTok movie, or like it would end and so you go to the next scene. Oh, my son, I'm trying to learn to talk, to speak to my children. So it's a great process. Something about no caps. And, my youngest son's talking about risen, and I don't know. So, you get applause for this. All right, here's the hardest one of the day. I am not saying anybody would do this in real life. Okay? Maybe 2 a.m. Shrimp Festival, but that's like exceptional. Some of you did at the Shrimp Festival at 2 o'clock. Start. Yes, this was tough. Think about their phone out. They're like, come on, Ken, let's do it so I can take it away. Start. Translation. Start. Finish. Start. Finish. Woo! I feel that stretch. I got 3 words for that stretch. Got it on. Start. Finish. Notice I keep emphasizing start and finish because I don't want you to get confused when I come back to redo, okay? Start position, little lightheaded, finish position. It's going to be all work. That might be the hardest question you can get on the test. But what's cool though is that I'm hoping that you guys, by coming to class and staying on track, you have the tools that even though you may not know the answer, you might be able to figure it out. You might be able to figure out the clues. And you know why I did this one last? Almost like a process of elimination. If it doesn't look like the other ones, then it can't be the same thing as the other ones. Does that make sense? I'm going to give y'all some time on this one. This is one of the last few ones that I can really throw out there to see if you can process clues and figure out. So remember, on this example, you're like rotating like a helicopter propeller, okay? Just want to make sure that you understand. You imagine going to the gym and like, guys, I got this new exercise. Here, come on, join in. All right, we're good? I want a little bit more time?
Can we see it again?
Yeah, that's cool. That was sweet. Yes. I mean, flexibility. Start. Finish. And man, do I feel that. Start. Finish. Good? We're good? We're good? Okay. Pelvic girdle rotation. Right lateral. Any questions? Why? Sure. I'll tell you what, let's do process of elimination. But that works for me. It may not work for you. I like to, if you can see what it's not, then maybe it can expose what it is. Okay. Anterior and posterior. Like if I'd have done, all right, how can I move? I can do sagittal. Well, that's going to be anterior posterior. It's not that. I didn't see that. We already established that this was transverse. So the only thing left is frontal. So in other words, my pelvis, when I was standing up, this is frontal, correct? So this is frontal. Don't make fun, judge me. That's frontal. That's so silly. Don't judge me. Does that make sense though? Like this is frontal. So, Kelly Clarkson. This would be frontal, or this would be frontal. So we're talking about right and left lateral. Better? Guys, there's no law that says human movement has to be super simple. And I think that's the elegance and beauty of you guys really, and when I say you guys, the ones that are here and the ones that watch consistently over there, that you're embracing that human movement is not easy. And it's going to make you such a better practitioner of whatever you guys decide to do for a living. Okay? I promise you, I hear it from way too many former students. So we're good why this is right lateral. Remember, it's from the pelvis perspective. Now the hard part. What hip motion spun the basketball? Right hip internal rotation. Anybody wants an explanation or for me to try to explain that?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. I'm flexed, true? Okay. I'm flexed, true? It's the same position for me, like first test stuff, right? This is the same position as this. He's just not shaking uncontrollably, but it's the same position, okay? All right. If I start here, which is the same position that I was down there, and I know that this is external rotation, and this is internal rotation. Just like this is internal and that's external. External, internal, true? Notice how this hip rotation now is in the same plane as my lateral pelvic girdle rotation. You see that? You see it? Very similar. That's why we build upon it. It's no different than why this was internal and external rotation because of lateral pelvic rotation on the side. No different. I'm just in a different position from the ground, from the root. So when I'm here and I have right lateral, I am internally rotated. Hey, right hip, rotate like I'm used to seeing you rotate to go back home. The right hip would say, no problem. External rotation. So that meant I internally rotated when I left. External, internal. Here's another way to look at it. Let me see if I can do this. I got a 6.5 from the Russian judge, man, I got screwed. Okay, check this out. Let's see if I can do this. This is internal rotation. And I'm going to try to show it to you by moving in the sagittal plane to come back to anatomical and show you that I'm internally rotated. Make sense? Questions? How about some from last class? What's this? I'm not saying you're wrong. I want everybody to have a look at the time. Left lateral. I mentioned this last class. The reason you may be tripped up is because linearly you may see the ball shift to the right. But this isn't about shifting of anything. It's about spinning of everything. The basketball can still spin left while it shifts to the right. True? Okay? So left lateral pelvic girdle rotation. What did the left hip do? Ab. What did the right hip do? Add. On the test, when I say would it, could it, I could ask you, you're standing on both feet, you're in anatomical position. From there, you have left lateral pelvic girdle rotation. What must happen to your hips? It's a fair question. Because if you're in anatomical position and you do this and both feet stay on the ground, this one has to do that and this one has to do this. I could also say you're standing in anatomical position, both feet on the ground. Your left hip is going to undergo abduction while both feet stay on the ground. What does your pelvis have to do and what does your right hip have to do? It's A plus B is equal to C. As long as I give you A and C, you can solve for B. As long as I give you A and B, you can solve for C. As long as I give you B and C, you can solve for A. Make sense? Or I can do the traditional, you go to a picture before and after. It's all different forms of the same thing. True. All right, how about this one? What did my right hip do? Remember, obvious motion only. On the test, this is exam 1 stuff, but it just goes to show you how easy it is to get tracked. Some people are going to say, oh, the right hip externally rotates, because they're going to be looking at it from their right. It's from the person you're analyzing's perspective. What did my right hip do? Nothing. Went along for the ride. Had no effect. Right hip knucking. Still in anatomy. Left hip externally rotated. How did the pelvis spin? Right transverse. Let me give you some practical knowledge before we dismiss. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Things change. But we are in a, you know how if you have like we don't sling anymore in medicine because it atrophies the muscles. And we only cast if it's like bad. The bones need to reset constantly. But imagine if you were in a sling for an extended period of time and you get out of it and the muscles will be very stiff. Okay? Your hips are now in activity of daily living slings. Just like you wouldn't want to flex your elbow for an extended period of time because all those muscles are going to be on slack and your body eats away the slack because it wants attention. When we're seated, like in class, when we're driving, like in our car, when we're watching TV, when we're working at our desk, our hips are in a slung position. They're flexed, just like our elbow would be flexed in the same position. And then what happens is these muscles get tight, just like your elbow flexors would get tight. But then when you go to stand, and you're like, ooh, this is really tight, what you're not going to do is be like, oh, that's tight, and then walk around like this. What you're going to do is you're going to say, oh, this is tight. Let me keep my pelvis tilted forward because that's going to be in a flexed position. And I'm just going to compensate by arcing my back so that my eyes and my shoulders stay low. So in other words, it's a lot harder to see tight hip muscles because you can compensate by flexing the hips by moving the pelvis, but the legs stay perpendicular to the ground, so it's hard to see. So that's why I need to get you guys to see pelvis positions. I need you guys to see the position of the pelvis so that you can see what positions these hips might be in that a normal person wouldn't be able to see because they're like, well, the legs are straight, so everything must be fine. That make sense?
Kind of having an anterior pelvic.
Exactly like having an anterior pelvic into the side, but I'm excited. And that's what it is. When your pelvis is tilted anteriorly, your hips are flexed. Yeah, it's common. Yeah. Good. Bye, guys. You have a good day. That's exactly what And you know what's cool? The interior pelvic seal is just a positional verbiage for the side. Like on flex. Rather I've answered some duties.
Is it absurd to bring a dog?
A dog? Oh, gosh, I was like, for a dog? I mean, it's almost, yeah, I don't mind. Or what I can do is, bring, if you like that type, I can just bring it and pass it around.
I might need that.
Let me,
I feel like that'll work.
let me give that some thought.
That's cool.
Let me give that
It
some
was
thought.
just thought, I was like, okay, because I was thinking about the question that I asked, right? It was like this.
Because I think I may have a good solution that I'm gonna go over on Friday, I think would be very, very helpful. Absolutely. Give me Friday's lecture to see if what I'm suggesting would serve just as good or better than the emotional support does. And that's not a crazy question, that's a good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Whenever you are rotating with it,
Uh-huh.
could it be saying, oh, I'm opening my hip and closing my hip?
You can, but that's where the illusions can sometimes not line up. So in other words, if I say I'm opening my right hip, I think the opinion would be different if I say, am I opening or closing my right hip?
Your hip's still closed though.
We know that, but I think someone might look at it as, well, how am I not opening my right hip?
Oh, okay.
So I'm not saying,
I mean, I
no,
yeah, I see it now.
but it's one of those, like, if this is open, they want to think that this must be opening as well.
Okay,
And that's not the case.
okay.
So just be careful.
Okay. The other one is,
Uh-huh.
so can you have